So I guess we've a couple of housekeeping rules. I've been advised that we do have somebody with a microphone available here. So as we get the questions, please raise your hand before you get a question. We'll put that through. We will open it up as a general panel conversation, so you can target your question at any of the panel members. I'll try and moderate or direct them if I feel it's appropriate, whatever. But I think, obviously, just to sort of tee it off, I think we've obviously had some very interesting and quite thought-provoking presentations this afternoon in part of the Wells session, with some quite common themes, I think, as well. Some of them that have challenged us as organizations to look at differently at the way that we do the things that we do. Right. And try and sort of, you know, if we want to move forward, we've got a couple of things here to explore, primarily the and develop the small pools that are out there that are going to be available in the license round. We need to do things differently. And we need to do differently in a Wells arena, because Wells constantly would be somewhere between 30 and 60% of a development sort of cost for these types of areas. So working in different and innovative ways is something that we need to sort of really focus in on if we want to change the way that we would do things and make these smaller pools viable. So some really interesting conversations, but I'll open it up now to questions from the floor, and we'll moderate as best we can. Yeah. Paddy?
Paddy O'Brien, ITF. Great presentations, guys. Thanks very much for everything. That was good. So the thing that struck me, Ken, I put the question to you about multilaterals. The thing that struck me about your presentation was that you kept referring to the fact that here in the UK, we just don't seem to do it. I think you mentioned something about somebody flying over from the other side of the world and something happens to them or whatever. But I'm sure you must have analysed this yourself, and you must have some ideas, you must have some insight as to why you think we haven't adopted that technology more here in the UK than any other place. I'd appreciate if you can give some insight in that. Thanks.
I think what I've seen in the last 20 years is that in the UK, we just don't have the portfolio of multiple targets that they have in other areas of Europe. And although we do them, we do tend to do them on single wells. And meanwhile, we're planning the hopper and we're looking to do the next well after that. So you might do one well or two wells, maybe even three wells over a 1 or 2 year period. But there just isn't the big infrastructure, reservoir structures to be able to go and do that in the UK. But some of the more successful ones that have had campaigns have been Southern North Sea, where it's been tight rock, small pools, quite shallow, jack-ups, the weather's fairly good, and we had a lot of good success down there in some of the wells. So, and I think what we're getting now in the North Sea is that I think people were trying to cling on to the easy wells, but the easy wells have all gone now, and it's no longer that multilaterals are the fifth row on a spreadsheet column of, oh, we're going to do ERD drill and managed pressure drill, and multilaterals just fall off the edge. I think it's now actually shining the light in people's faces to say, we have to think about this because the savings can be significant. But I think there has been a problem. People just didn't want to do it because it was different from the norm.
I think perhaps there's another reason, and although there's only a small chance of failure, I think a couple of %, nobody wants that failure on their well, yeah? And if you've only got one that year, if you've got 100, I'll take 2. But if I've only got one, I don't want any chance of failure.
But do you think that's changed in the recent past? Because if I go back to the late 80s, the early 90s, the North Sea was leading the way in technology deployment and development as for the industry. But that sort of seems to have changed over the last few years, and we've seen a little bit more conservative, a bit risk averse. Do you see that in your areas?
I think it was perhaps leading the way in some areas of technology, but take multilaterals or underbalanced or things like that. They were actually being developed in Canada at the time, yeah? Mm-hmm. And the low cost environment where you could afford to lose a well, it didn't cost you very much, yeah?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. So I would challenge that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've come across the expression of the regret cost, which is essentially the cost of failure, and that is both a direct cash cost, but it can be personal bonus, it can be reputational career-threatening sort of stuff. And I agree the point, you know, if it's one failure in one well, that's 100% failure rate and it's not very good. If it's one failure in 100 wells, a very different proposition.
Yeah, totally agree on that piece, yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
Hi, Clara Altabel, Serica Energy. Is there a difference between companies with in-house drilling departments and companies that use well management companies on sort of adopting new technology and on well costs?
I'll volunteer an opinion as I don't work for any of them right now. So my observation is there is a big difference, and it's something to do with volume. Very early on in my career in the industry, it was still the case that some operators had things like an in-house wirelining department or an in-house fracking department, because that's how the oil industry grew up. The normal that we now see with service companies delivering most of these is simply because of volume. If you've got somebody doing a stimulation job or a logging job, and they do 100 of them a year, they've got practice, they've got experience. And my observation is that particularly as things have turned down and in-house groups have only got 3 wells in a year to do, and they're all dead keen to do it, they're simply not getting the experience and the exposure that a contracting or consultancy firm who are doing 50 wells a year might be getting. And that is both the personal experience for the individuals and what you might call the collective experience. So I think there is, I have seen directly improved costs. I'm not sure I've got any data to back that up, but anecdotally certainly there is an advantage. As there's an advantage if you can batch do things, if you can get 5 or 10 wells in a geographical area and just learn, because people forget quite quickly.
Okay. Any other? Get the microphone.
Yeah, does the panel think that rig rates for rigs, semis particularly in the North Sea, now are sort of right at rock bottom, or is there a bit further to go?
I'm not in the rig market, but I guess it's supply and demand, yeah. If demand goes up, then rig rates will go up. If demand goes down, they will go down, yeah. At the moment, there's no sign of, there's plenty of spare capacity in the rig market, I believe, yeah.
I have a personal experience from about 15 years ago when I contracted one of the Senko 700 drilling rigs for around about $45,000 a day in a very, very depressed market. And I think I believed it when I was told that was as near as down at their operating rate. And the same rig was hired 3 years later by BP for $450,000 a day. So clearly, given what I read about current market rates, I'm no longer in that market, but it would suggest that there is further to go down if one really wanted to go down. Nobody does, but it's...
I think there's more tightness in other parts of the supply chain now. Mm-hmm. It won't be the rigs that will go up first.
I'm thinking in terms of exploration drilling. I mean, if that would encourage more exploration drilling, if we've got some really good rates.
If you want to do exploration drilling, now's the time to do it, yeah, it's cheap.
And there's the slightest thing around
Still
at the
not
moment.
enough investment, though, that's the problem. I mean, there's not enough money around to do it.
Well, I mean, I'm not in the exploration business, but if you can buy existing production cheaper than exploring for it, why would you explore for it, yeah? There's a lot of assets out there for sale right now, around the world, yeah.
There is a recognition by some of the operators that they've got to be really careful that they don't put any drilling contractors out of business, and that we don't lose a lot of the rigs that are capable of working in the UKCS and the North Sea. It's not just drilling. A lot of these rigs are used for well abandonment as well. We all know the number of wells that have got to be abandoned. There's a lot of work out there, and the quickest way to get rig rates go up is for there to be no rigs to do the work. So there is recognition from some of the operators that no, they don't want to drive the cost down on the rigs.
Yeah, if we lose a lot of the fleet from the North Sea, then it's going to be really difficult to get it back. That's for sure.
I think another key thing with exploration is, and and we're seeing a number of operators doing this, is to get the cycle time down from exploration to production. In the past, what we tended to do was explore, then appraise, then do a field development plan, and then half a dozen years later, or in some cases 20 years later or more, get your cash back from that production. Now, I think your last presentation, the idea that you know your reservoir from an exploration appraisal campaign is pretty low, actually. So some operators now are thinking in terms of doing, let's collect minimal data, put what we find on production early, and then do a more phased development campaign, yeah. And that brings the cash flow cycle down, and it means you learn for later phases of development. You collect data more during the development phase. So exploration appraisal and development become more fuzzy and less separate, yeah.
But one of the challenges with that in the environment of a small pool is that you've only normally got 1 or 2 wells that you're looking to deliver as part of the development phase. So you've not got a lot of opportunity to, if you like, learn as you go. You've got to really understand as much as you can beforehand. Yeah.
Then you've got to think of a portfolio of pools, a pool of pools.
Which is where the pooled piece is the opportunity. Yeah.
I'm bringing this up because, you know, drilling a well is a very, very fundamental part of any work program. And people applying in the 30th licensing round for licenses will be very much orientated towards when and what type of well they're going to drill. And that's what the OGA need to satisfy license terms at the end of the day. So if for reasons of the fact it just costs, particularly for the smaller organisations that are struggling to get investment, that the rig rates are still at a level that they'll never be able to make any kind of commitment, then, you know, this isn't good for licensing, if you like.
True, but there are, you know, by working together, if you've got a number of small operators want to drill a number of exploration wells, then if they shared a rig, you know, you don't have all this mobilisation and demobilisation costs. If they standardise the drilling programmes, and that can be done, and it has been done in the past, although there's a lot of reluctance to it, but it has been done in the past. There are ways of significantly reducing the cost to try and make things economic. Doing things the way we've always done it is not an option. That's been one of the mantras for today. We've got to do things differently. And with all the 30th round, with lots of these small developments, companies are going to have to work together to make it economic.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's been talked about for the last 2 years. So, good.
Okay. Any more questions? Because it probably, well, other people are thinking, it probably builds on that last comment as well, which is around, so part of that is learning, how do we actually we've got to start either collaborating to the point that we can start at the bottom end of a learning curve rather than each individual operator or license holder starting at the higher end of a learning curve. What are you thinking your respective areas of specialism are the sort of key levers that you could offer in that area?
Well, I mean, one...
From tight gas, I guess, okay.
Okay, well, there's a learning curve for a particular location, but you can also learn from what others have done elsewhere, yeah? I think we all alluded to that, yeah? Why is, and Ian too, why is Norway doing this, but the UK isn't? It's the same formation, same geology,
Yeah, the rock
same
doesn't know. Yeah.
infrastructure, but we don't do the same thing. And why is that, yeah? I mean, same operators on both sides as well, yeah? There's no doubt there's an economy of scale in this business, yeah? The bigger work program you can put together, the cheaper it is. I mean, that's a fundamental law of economics, yeah? And the main challenge I see in the North Sea, if you compare it to somewhere like North America, is we just don't have that scale. So the question is how to get that scale. The way things are so fragmented in terms of operatorship and infrastructure, it requires some sort of working together and pooling it. And the service companies can facilitate that by offering, you know, we have a rig and all the services, and try and put a campaign together, and we've tried to do that, and we've struggled to do that, yeah? So that maybe the OGA, I know the OGA has been trying to encourage that as well, so I guess we have to punt it back to the operators and ask why operators not pooling. Like, why are they having their own car instead of an Uber, yeah?
Yeah. Good analogy.
You
Any
still
other
own,
comments on that, or-
still own.
I have a completely different point I'd like to raise with Tom.
Okay. Go ahead, Ian, yeah.
So completely different issue to throw into this mix is the fragmentation within certainly the middle-sized and larger companies, operators. I have a particular tale. I will deliberately keep the relevant companies anonymous for the moment, but a large Norwegian operator on one of their fields drilled some remarkably sophisticated, very long-reach wells, penetrating multiple reservoir targets, and in round numbers, for the roughly twice the cost of a standard well, they got the equivalent of 5 wells. Huge economic benefit and a huge saving and a huge improvement in the economics. The procurement department then decreed that the learning that had gone on between the operator and its extended reach drilling equipment provider was that the contract was now up for 5 years, and they rebid it. And the contractor involved didn't win. They lost by a few cents a metre type cost. And the company never drilled a well like that again. So I think there's a little bit needs to go on about, and describe it as taking a holistic view of what you're doing. The individual unit costs is not actually what we're about. It's the profitability of the project is really what we're about. And maybe behaviours and incentives need to be changed to ensure that it is the overview that's taken.
Yeah, good points. Okay, any more questions from the floor? Or are we all coming towards the end of a long afternoon and a long day? Okay. Will there be any more comments from yourselves, gentlemen? No? No? Okay. Oh, Paddy again, just in at the death there.
The discussion going or something like that. I mean, I know we started out on a kind of a thing here a number of years ago in terms of well construction and trying to get the cost of well construction down. I mean, is there any sense of how that's evolving? Can anybody draw a picture about how well construction might change? Or is it going to continue? Are we going to continue, as you say, do the things we've always done? Or, so whether it's multilaterals, whether it's managed pressure drilling, whether it's, thin wall well construction or whatever, is there any kind of, does the panel feel that there's any movement or evolution in that that might lead us to a new vision for how we might do things in the future?
I think it's early kind of days in pushing all this with the amount of drilling that's gone on over the past few years has been so little. One of the interesting things that has come through with the use of things like geosteering, with some of the tools that we have nowadays, the number of geological sidetracks that are being drilled is significantly reduced. So this isn't planned geological sidetracks. This is geological sidetracks because reservoir wasn't there, you didn't find what you were looking for, that sort of thing. If you look at the statistics that have been published on the number of wells drilled, sidetracks are reducing significantly. So that's good, because they're expensive, they're wasted money. Unless you're planning to deliberately do it to go and acquire more data, a sidetrack is wasted money. So we do see things starting to come through with the use of new technology, such as geosteering, and those sorts of tools, that we can make significant cost reductions for the wells.
Excuse me, I have another observation, which is that in 1986 there was an oil price crash not dissimilar in its impact to the current crash. And in the 1990s, when the oil price was bumbling along at $25, $28, $30 a barrel, there was a major North Sea industry initiative under the horrendous name of crime. But one of the things that came out of that was the concept of a finder well. And this was a deliberately lean, mean, cheap well to do your exploration, but to minimize the cost of the exploration well. Now, you don't hear about finder wells anymore. At best, its legacy was that people at least asked a few questions about whether they really needed all those casing strings in a well to be drilled. That's kind of it. And oddly enough, come this crisis, we've got a wells initiative with a target of 50% cost reduction. And I'm sort of left wondering what we missed sometimes. We kind of forgot that there was a need to do things at a lower cost. And I wonder whether there are any lessons to be dragged out of the archives from that, because people did dramatically reduce the cost of exploratory wells, and a lot more wells got drilled.
Yeah, well, I remember those days myself very well, and I think, you know, in this industry we always balance ourselves with that opportunity of saying, can we do the find a throwaway type well, or do we want to sit and hold on to this because it may be the sort of subsequent development well that we want to turn it into later on? So we're balancing that conundrum, and how many of those sit there for years and years and never get gone back and looked at until they ultimately get a final abandonment, maybe 20 years down the line. So I think there are opportunities in that area that we could work back on. And the other one to me, I would say that I would add to that, Paddy, that links to Margaret's point, which is data is we live in a very data-intensive era, and as an industry, the drilling side of things has been a little bit lax, maybe within our own industry, at data. And part of that's driven by what we can actually get downhole, real time, and make decisions on. So some of the technologies that are coming through are really enabling change in that area, where we can get different mechanisms for telemetry of data from downhole to surface, much faster, orders of magnitude bandwidth better, that will enable those types of real-time decisions, and I think that will make a big difference in the next few years.
I think possibly the well designs might not change, but I think we're still in an era where we're designing wells to last 20, 25 years, when in reality they maybe only need to last 3 or 4 years. And that could mean that we could just stop using exotic materials as the standard and start using something that's just fit for purpose. And that can be applied to this morning. A lot of the sessions were about designing flow lines for using 4 times. Why not just reduce the metallurgy, the wall thickness, and make them used once for 4 years rather than the exotics, etc. So I think it's just making it fit for purpose instead of over-engineering things for a 20, 25-year life cycle.
Okay, right, well, I think it's maybe... Oh, we've got one more question. Go on.
Well, I actually had 2 questions, but I'll ask this one. So one of the first things that Ian said in his presentation this afternoon was that the well costs had doubled over the last 10 years in the North Sea, but they've been coming down elsewhere. So why do we think the well costs have doubled in the North Sea? Is it simply that we're going for more complex wells, or is it something else? And if it's something else, what are we going to do to improve that?
Well, I suspect they've halved since then, yeah. They've doubled and they've halved again, yeah, I think. But if you look at the North American experience, the cost reduction has been driven by efficiency, not by using cheaper rigs or cheaper technology. It's been better bits, better motors, better rigs.
So we may be...
That's what's driven the cost reduction, yeah.
So we may be being less efficient in the North Sea over the last while. Much longer flat spots in the rigs, and if you look at time depth curves, that it's, you know, the line of the curve doesn't seem to change for drilling sections and things like that, but it's the flat spots that are longer.
On-bottom drilling performance has improved dramatically, yeah. I mean, bits now perform phenomenally. In fact, our company has a bit business. It's nearly out of business because the bits last so long, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But for UKCS wells, approximately 40-50% of the total well cost is your rig, which is this is for using mobile rigs, different for platform wells or onshore wells. So with that being such a huge amount of the cost, and that is very much driven by supply and demand, there's not a lot that can be done about that unless you reduce the number of days. So it's slightly different from some of the other areas. But there's still a lot of non-productive time that can be addressed. But if we really want to get after this 50% cost reduction, we're going to have to get some transformational technology. Because if half the cost is the rig, and we want to half the cost of the total well, then we can't do it unless we do something totally different.
I think if you step back and look at a rig, I mean, I used to work on a rig 25 years ago, and I look at it now, there's really been very little change. There's still a lot of people on a rig, and people cost a lot of money, and they cost a lot more money than I was paid 25, 30 years ago, yeah? And we have to look at ways of reducing the manpower, yeah, and that will reduce the footprint, reduce the cost, improve the HSE, and there are ways to do that. It's very difficult to do that with a fragmented supply chain, yeah? Even within our company, our product lines are fragmented, yeah? But we have looked at a rig, and it's quite possible with the same technology now to do the same thing with half the people. If we cross-train and cross, I mean, I used to work on a rig. 90% of the time, I sat there doing nothing. Yeah, because there were a flat spot, they were tripping, and it wasn't my job. I had a small role. Yeah, but it's not a very efficient process, and it's not very efficient because it's fragmented and we don't use technology, automation, like other industries do. Hard to do that because it's also very high-cost business, but it's small. There's not many rigs around the world. If you compare it with a car or other industries where we've automated, where you build millions, but that's the way to reduce cost, is to get people out and automate. There is people working on that, but it's slow,
And I guess the other question, and it was a little bit about the transformational technologies, is that if you have in the North Sea, a lot of what's left is marginal. It tends to be being exploited by small to medium-sized companies, and they're maybe more likely to push forward and select new technologies, transformational technologies, than some of the bigger ones. However, these companies need to attract investment to be able to move forward with the developments. And what I've seen is that if you put a lot of technology up front and say, this is the way we're going to do it, nobody wants to invest because it's too risky. The return is, the risk-return balance. So I think it's quite a big hurdle to get over, as we can talk about putting new technology, and even old technology that exists and is used elsewhere, but then you come into the North Sea and say, well, we can't do that because we don't do it, and we're not going to invest in it because it's 2 steps away from our kind of comfort zone. So
the onshore tight oil and gas market was driven by small companies, entrepreneurs, yeah? So the entrepreneurial spirit is not lacking because there are small companies, but the entrepreneurial capital is lacking.
yeah, it's the capital's issue.
And it is the scale piece as well. So the deployment scale that you can develop some of those technologies on doesn't exist here as it does in the lower 48. So we have to find different and smarter ways of adopting and adapting those technologies into the industry here.
But if somebody comes up with something truly transformational, it will be used. We haven't got that yet. Stuff getting worked in laboratories at the moment, but if people do come up with something that does totally change how we construct wells or how we exploit hydrocarbons, because who says we have to construct wells in the first place? If somebody comes up with something that's really, really worth doing, then the industry will pick it up.
Well, but multilaterals save you 70%, and nobody in the UK seems to have picked it up, I guess. That seems quite a transformational saving.
I think Ken would agree. It's not suitable for every well, but yes, it could be used in places. It saves you 70% on your second well, not on your first one, so it's not your complete. But you come up with an idea that will half our total costs of wells, and just wait for everybody trying to use that technology.
Thanks.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, we better move on. So maybe thank you for your attention today. Maybe could you just thank one last time our presenters for their efforts this afternoon. Thank you. Okay, to close the episode, before we all stand up and move, just to close off the session, we've got reintroduced to Carlo Procaccini from the Oil and Gas Authority, who's going to go and close down our afternoon and our day. Thank you.
Thank you, and well done with the session on the wells, an interesting Q&A panel. Thank you very much, Malcolm, Margaret, and the presenters. Thanks all of you for your attendance today, for taking time from your busy days, for being here today. Some of you have traveled from other parts of the country. And special thanks to presenters and exhibitors. Everyone has made a big effort to showcase their ideas, their technologies, their practices. I'm really grateful to them for the commitment. So let's go back to the 30th round. It is a round focused on mature acreage. what does mature mean? And there is always the half full and half empty glass here. So mature, if we read mature as, well, there are no attractive opportunities left. This is one way of looking at mature. Or we can say, no, however, we think that a more accurate description could be that when the industry looked at this acreage 10, 20, 30 years ago, they did so with the mindset of the time, with the technologies of the time, and at the time they could not find attractive opportunities worth developing. So we could take the view that now, by thinking differently, and that's one of the points that the panel made before, by thinking differently, we actually are able to make more progress. We give this mature acreage a second chance. And it's not just about technology, we heard. Yes, indeed, we have to use the right technologies, and that's very important, but also we have to execute exploration and developments more efficiently. So it will be a combination of technologies and best practices and efficiencies, including leveraging the market efficiencies. There was long discussion around rig rates. If it is a great opportunity to explore now, let's explore now. So it has to be the summation of a number of things we do differently that allow us actually to succeed this time. So that was therefore what really prompted us to bring together, on one side, technology companies. Today, technology companies on one side, together with potential investors that are interested in potentially applying for 30th round licenses and or developing marginal fields, marginal discoveries that are already into the hands of operators at this point in time. Let's not forget there is a mix out there of undeveloped discoveries. Only part of those are now part of the 30th round. I would say about half of them, if not more, are already in the hands of companies. So therefore, we can together develop more between new discoveries and discoveries that are currently sitting in part of a backlog of discoveries. So I hope that you found the presentations, the exhibitions today, an interesting cross-section of what is available out there in terms of technology, techniques, practices, and what can become available. Some of these technologies are still under development. They need to be fully tested. Some of them have a lower risk profile. Some of them have a higher risk profile. I think that investors will find the optimum medium where it makes sense to take a little bit of a risk in order to get greater gains and unlock some of the field's opportunities. So I hope that today started that conversation. So what happens next? Next, the OGA will focus on the application and awarding phase of the 30th round. And as we heard from Nick Richardson, my colleague, earlier today, technology will be very important, will be a key criterion for that. And we will be looking at, of course, all sorts of company commitments, but of course it's also what data companies bring into the round, what techniques and technologies for the interpretation of those data, and what do we bring into our exploration drilling, and eventually for blocks that contain already discoveries, what is different this time? What are the development methodology approaches that we're bringing in order to unlock those old discoveries. So following that, and in reality, in parallel with that, with the OGA, we'll keep engaging with operators around their technical aspects of their development, exploration, development, and operations, in order to make sure that when there are valuable lessons learned, those are shared. When there are valuable technologies that should be more commonplace, I take a few examples. The multilaterals, DRD, we heard today, just to take examples from the last session. More in stimulations, for instance. When there are things that are fairly well accepted and fairly well known, those are actually becoming a little bit more mainstream. When there are things that need to be tried in pilot, why don't we take an opportunity to do that in the setting of a development that might be unlocked by using that particular technique? So that would be the role of the OGA in influencing and around influencing and promoting. And we will be continue working with our partner, the Oil and Gas Technology Center, regarding the development of technologies that are yet to come. Technologies with maybe at different degrees of maturity, including the ones that Margaret alluded to, that are the more breakthrough ones, the ones that will make greater greater impact in terms of cost, of recovery, and eventually of development economics. So that is in a nutshell our plan going forward. So now what I need to do last but not least is actually to thank everybody that put effort in organizing this event. So the Oil and Gas Authority team that has participated in that, we have a few in the room, Margaret, Jim over there, Dave Packett over there. Sorry if I forget anyone. And the Oil and Gas Technology Center, Malcolm, you're here. I don't know if any other colleagues are around there. They're probably all in the standalone session now. But to all of us at the OGA and the Oil and Gas Technology Center, we participated in bringing this together, plus Katrina Dunbar, who's helped us with the organization, plus the staff at the Aberdeen Exhibition Center that has done a great job today in keeping us well looked after and fed, I should say. Then thanks. And really, this has been, I hope, for you, has been a successful event, an interesting event to attend, but it is down sometimes to organization, and thank you. Now, the proceedings from this event are going to be, oops, no, I don't have a slide. Okay, proceedings of these events are going to be posted on both the OGA and the Oil and Gas Technology Center websites. You will receive links in order to access the material, presentations, posters, and videos. And these are just our contacts for any questions and queries you want to field. So thanks again for attending, and I invite you to continue with your networking. There are 1.5 hours, in that order, until 6 or 6:30 p.m. Of networking time downstairs with coffee and interesting conversations with technology companies. Thank you.